My name is Lauren. I am 32. And when I returned from a 5-day corporate audit in London, I expected the worst thing waiting for me to be an overflowing inbox. Instead, the climate controlled suburban barn at my father's house was empty. My firm's flagship corporate showcase piece, the 1973 Porsche 911 Carrera RSI, had rebuilt, insured, and protected for years, was gone. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Emotion is just a corrosive element in a structural audit. I neutralize it immediately. Refusing to scream or collapse onto the pristine concrete floor of the barn, I recognized that anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. Attempting to summon some daughterly regret yielded nothing but cold, calculated precision. This wasn't a family breakdown. It was a hostile corporate takeover, and my father had just initiated an unauthorized liquidation. Stepping out of the barn, I pulled my laptop from my carry-on bag and sat on the hood of my rental car. Accessing the encrypted corporate portal for my architectural restoration firm took only seconds. Requesting an explanation from Richard or Patricia would have been a waste of operational bandwidth. Instead, I initiated the lockdown. The first ping went straight to the dual micro trackers Cameron and I had embedded deep within the Porsche's chassis months ago. A red blinking dot appeared immediately on my screen, moving steadily east on Interstate 80. Next, the concealed surveillance feeds loaded seamlessly. High-definition cameras had been a non-negotiable condition of our corporate insurance policy before agreeing to store the vehicle in Richard's barn. Reviewing the archive footage from 48 minutes ago confirmed my hypothesis. There they were, Richard, my father, smiling that practiced, hollow smile of a retired mid-level manager projecting false wealth. Patricia, my stepmother, standing beside him with a glass of champagne, celebrating a victory she hadn't earned. And Savannah, my 26-year-old half-sister, filming the entire process on her phone for her aspiring luxury travel aesthetic. Watching with detached fascination as Richard handed the transport keys to a commercial driver, I saw a man entirely convinced that biological ties granted him perpetual immunity. They felt no remorse for the theft. Their only shock would come when they realized the foundational support they relied on had been permanently demolished. For years, my compassion had been a structural reinforcement they took for granted, an endless supply line they believed they were entitled to deplete. That supply line was now severed. My fingers flew across the keyboard. With 3 keystrokes, revoking Savannah's honorary access to our firm's digital archives was complete. Another click froze the secondary corporate accounts Richard had occasionally used for emergency property taxes under the guise of family borrowing. Locking them out of the digital ecosystem of my life happened in total silence. The harsh glare of my laptop screen illuminated a new reality, one built entirely on encrypted access logs, verifiable data, and absolute legal leverage. Cameron answered on the second ring, stating immediately that the flagship vehicle was moving. Confirming his report, my voice remained steady, devoid of any familial grief. The truth was simple. Richard had sold it, directing Cameron to download the barn footage, secure the access logs, and keep tracking the GPS until it crossed the state line took less than a minute. We were waiting for them to cross into Indiana so we could officially treat this as a federal interstate commerce crime. There was no hesitation on his end. Cameron understood logistics better than anyone, and he knew a breach of contract when he saw one. Closing my laptop and sliding it back into my bag finalized the preliminary phase. My family thought I would fold when they used blood as a weapon. They didn't realize I had just turned it into federal evidence. It is easy for outsiders to ask how a father could brazenly steal a 6-figure asset from his own hard-working daughter. They do not understand the invisible architecture of a narcissistic family dynamic. Over decades, Richard and Patricia had meticulously constructed a psychological trap, a cruel normalization of exploitation. They had spent my entire life mentally converting my independent corporate success into a communal family resource. In their minds, they were not committing a federal crime. They were simply making a routine withdrawal from an account they believed they inherently owned. While my 20s were consumed by building a high-end architectural restoration firm from concrete and grit, they were quietly accumulating mountains of debt. Grueling 80-hour work weeks became my standard. Handling raw timber, vintage steel, and abrasive chemicals left my hands permanently calloused. Nights evaporated into blueprints, corporate tax filings, and systemic audits. The price of that ambition was paid in sweat, exhaustion, and absolute isolation. Savannah, meanwhile, paid for nothing. My 26-year-old half-sister was an aspiring luxury travel influencer, a career completely subsidized by Richard's dwindling retirement funds and Patricia's heavily leveraged credit cards. Savannah's entire existence was a curated feed of European cafes, luxury retreats, and designer wardrobes. When Richard and Patricia quietly accumulated crippling gambling losses and massive unpaid property taxes, they did not ask Savannah to get a job. They simply looked at my profit margins. Affection in our household had never been unconditional. It functioned as a parasitic partnership, where I supplied the capital and they reaped the dividends. My empathy was merely a resource they had aggressively stripped mine for years. They conditioned the entire family to view my corporate success as their personal safety net, but I had resigned from the position of their foundational support structure long ago. When my business partner, Cameron, and I acquired the vintage Porsche, we did not buy it as a personal weekend toy. It was a calculated business investment. We spent 2 years meticulously restoring it, transforming a ruined vintage shell into our firm's flagship corporate showcase piece. It was the physical embodiment of our brand, representing our meticulous logistics and unparalleled craftsmanship. Because Cameron understood the volatile nature of my family's entitlement, we took zero chances. We legally bound the vehicle entirely to our corporate entity. We established an ironclad chain of title, heavily encrypted the ownership documents, and secured them in a Chicago vault managed by our corporate attorneys. It was untouchable, heavily insured corporate property. But Richard never respected boundaries, legal or otherwise. To a man drowning in his own financial incompetence, my corporate asset was just a convenient life raft waiting to be hijacked. He looked at my firm's flagship project and saw only a quick liquidation to fund Savannah's next month-long European tour and clear Patricia's hidden debts. He genuinely believed his biological title as my father superseded my legal title as a corporate founder. He was about to learn a very cold, very expensive lesson about the difference between family expectations and federal law. I drove to Richard's house not to demand answers, but to conduct an audit. When I pushed open the front door, the scent of expensive champagne hit me first. They were gathered in the living room, celebrating a massive financial injection they had not earned. Richard sat in his favorite leather armchair, a crystal flute in his hand. Patricia leaned against the mantel, and Savannah was already scrolling through her phone, likely booking first-class flights. The Porsche is gone, and we both know you don't have the keys. Richard, I stated, remaining in the entryway. My voice stayed completely flat, offering a statement of fact rather than a plea for an explanation. Richard did not flinch. Refusing to offer a fabricated excuse or simulated apology, he simply took a slow sip of his champagne and smiled. That smug expression belonged to a man who thought his DNA was a blank check. "It's liquidated," Richard corrected, his tone breezy and triumphant. "I found a private collector willing to pay $250,000. We needed the capital, Lauren. Face it, you're just our ATM, and Savannah deserves to enjoy the best. You were hoarding an asset the family desperately required." Savannah laughed softly. "Cry about it." Questioning how he had bypassed our corporate security protocols was unnecessary. By stealing our official corporate letterheads and utilizing a corrupt notary he knew from his former career, he had fabricated a flawlessly forged board resolution that could pass a buyer's initial due diligence. Allowing him to speak was tactically sound. Narcissists always supply their own rope if granted enough silence. "Let me guess," I said. "You have already allocated the funds." "Reinvested," Savannah chimed in, not looking up from her screen. "It's called portfolio diversification. You wouldn't understand." Richard set his glass down, eager to boast about his masterful reallocation of my corporate property. $65,000 secured Savannah's European influencer tour. It's a month-long networking opportunity. essential for her brand. 45,000 cleared Patricia's debts. He continued, gesturing to my stepmother, property taxes and some unfortunate gambling deficits she accumulated. Family protects family, Lauren. Patricia took a sip of her drink, refusing to meet my eyes. Her silence was her endorsement of the theft. $90,000 was transferred directly to Savannah's LLC as sponsorship revenue, Richard said proudly. It gives her business legitimate cash flow on paper. And naturally, I retained a $25,000 transaction fee for negotiating the sale and handling the complex logistics. Itemizing the theft of my flagship corporate vehicle like a quarterly earnings report brought him visible pride. He was actively gloating over his illicit accounting. That leaves $25,000, I noted clinically, doing the math in my head. Richard's smile widened into a sneer. He leaned forward, aiming for a psychological kill shot. I put the remaining $25,000 in a private savings account, untouched. I'm keeping it there to lend back to you, just in case your little restoration firm ever needs a bailout. Consider it a father's safety net. Staring at him, the audacity wasn't shocking. It was merely data. You sold stolen corporate property, I stated. I liquidated a family asset, Richard snapped, his tone darkening. The smugness vanished, replaced by a venomous threat. And if you try to make a fuss about the paperwork, I will personally call every architectural firm in Chicago. I will tell them, you are suing your own father. I will paint you as unstable, ruthless, and impossible to work with. Your professional reputation will be ashes before the week is out. He thought he had me cornered. He believed the threat of public embarrassment would force my immediate compliance. Are we clear? He demanded. Surveying the three of them revealed nothing but a portfolio of liabilities. Crystal clear, I replied, offering a cold smile. By the way, Richard, do you want to know who you just sold stolen corporate property to? Watching their arrogant grins vanish into pale confusion, I didn't wait for an answer. Then I turned and walked out. I had all the verbal confirmation I needed to finalize the indictment. Initiating the strike didn't require waiting until I reached my car. The moment Richard's front door clicked shut behind me, my phone was already in my hand. Dialing Cameron and conferencing in our corporate attorneys in Chicago felt automatic. Rather than asking for advice, executing precise directives became the priority. They had treated this like a petty family disagreement over a borrowed toy. I was elevating it to a federal corporate war. We bypassed the slow courts for the initial strike and initiated an emergency fraud wire recall directly with their corporate banking institution. We did not bring emotional complaints to the fraud department. We brought data. We supplied the ironclad global positioning tracking logs, the time-stamped surveillance footage of the unauthorized transport, and the heavily encrypted chain of title proving the vehicle was an exclusive corporate asset. The bank required zero deliberation. A pending security freeze dropped like a steel cage over every cent of the $250,000 before my family even finished their champagne. The funds showed on their ledger but were locked in a pending investigation status across all their banking institutions. Savannah's European tour budget, frozen. Patricia's debt payments, halted. Richard's smug $25,000 transaction fee and the so-called safety net he had so generously held back, entirely inaccessible. In a matter of hours, their financial lifeline was severed. They had crossed state lines with a stolen corporate asset. This was no longer a domestic dispute. It was a federal interstate commerce crime. But the true lethal blow did not come from the judge. It came from the buyer's dossier. When our attorneys pulled the final wire transfer records, the name of the private collector flashed across my screen, Bradley. My eyes locked on his corporate affiliations, and the air in my lungs went completely still. Bradley was not just a wealthy vintage car enthusiast. He was a silent board member of the exact same corporate conglomerate I had just spent 5 days pitching my restoration services to in London. Richard had unwittingly sold my stolen flagship asset to the very executive who held the keys to my firm's multi-million-dollar contract. My family thought they were untouchable. They had no idea they had just handed me the ultimate leverage. I did not call Bradley as a frantic daughter. I had my attorneys contact his legal team as a defrauded corporate founder. We presented the forged authorization letters and the fraudulent bill of sale my father had fabricated. The response was immediate and devastating. Bradley was a man who built his empire on airtight audits and absolute integrity. He was absolutely horrified to discover he had been duped into a federal crime by a forgery. He did not defend Richard. He did not ask for a quiet family resolution. Instead, Bradley turned over every email, every text message, and every voicemail Richard had sent him. He fully aligned himself with my legal team. My father had gambled my corporate legacy to fund his delusions of wealth. He did not know that his perfect buyer was about to become the star witness in his federal indictment. The fallout from the London collision was instantaneous and absolute. Bradley was a man who engineered global corporate mergers. He did not tolerate amateur fraud. By Tuesday morning, he had utilized his industry leverage to execute a total professional blackout. Richard's career evaporated overnight. One quiet, documented phone call from Bradley's associates triggered an immediate systemic audit at Richard's firm, resulting in his termination before lunch. Savannah's influencer aspirations met a clinical fate. Bradley's conglomerate held controlling stakes in several hospitality brands she had been soliciting. Within hours, her name was red flagged across their global database. They were professionally quarantined. Simultaneously, the bank's fraud investigation maintained its ironclad chokehold on their finances. The $250,000 remained frozen in legal limbo. Patricia's hidden gambling debts compounded with brutal interest. Seeing the initial pending deposit, Savannah had foolishly maxed out her personal credit cards to secure her non-refundable European tour bookings, leaving her drowning in immediate, unpayable debt when the wire transfer was officially revoked. My family was suffocating under the crushing weight of their own liabilities. The communal bank account they had exploited for decades was permanently closed. On Thursday afternoon, my receptionist buzzed my line to announce an uninvited visitor. I walked out to the glass lobby of my firm to find Richard standing near the elevators. He looked entirely depleted, stripped of the unearned arrogance he had worn days prior. The smug smile was gone, replaced by the red, hollow eyes of a man who had finally read his own bankruptcy notice. He did not look like a father. He looked like a failing subsidiary begging the parent company for a desperate bailout. "Lauren," he said, his voice cracking as he stepped forward. "Please, you have to stop this. I lost my job. We are going to lose the house to foreclosure. You have made your point. Do something to help your sister." Offering him a seat felt inappropriate. Examining him with the cold detachment of an architect reviewing a structurally compromised building was the only suitable response. "I already did something," I replied, my voice completely flat. Striding over to the reception desk, I retrieved a meticulously tabbed legal folder and extended it toward him. Trembling hands accepted the documents as he searched my face for a sliver of the compliant daughter he thought he could perpetually manipulate. He found only immovable boundaries. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "That is the civil restitution demand," I stated. "It itemizes our corporate legal fees, the specialized transport recovery costs for the 1973 Porsche, and the corporate damages you incurred by committing a federal interstate commerce crime. You owe my firm an additional $42,000. Tears spilled over his eyelids. "Lauren, please. We are your family. We are completely ruined. Where is your forgiveness?" Watching him break brought no emotional triumph, only the quiet peace of a closed ledger. "Forgiveness is not an invoice, Richard," I said, "and my firm is no longer financing your delusions. Goodbye." Turning my back, I walked toward my office, leaving him standing alone with the final bill. Exactly 6 weeks after vanishing, our restored 911 returned to our Chicago studio. Standing on the pristine concrete floor of the fabrication bay, observing the transport team carefully unload the flagship asset brought a profound sense of restoration. Spotting a minor abrasion on the front splitter prompted an immediate assessment in voice, seamlessly forwarded to Richard's increasingly desperate legal counsel. Triumphant joy was absent as Cameron handed over the keys. Instead, the quiet, cold satisfaction of an audited, perfectly resolved inquiry washed over me. The federal investigation and the resulting civil restitution bled my family completely dry. Richard and Patricia were forced to sell the climate-controlled suburban barn and their heavily mortgaged primary residence just to cover the crippling legal fees and the corporate damages they owed my firm. They moved into a cramped, generic rental apartment on the far edge of the city. Savannah, stripped of her stolen sponsorship revenue and professionally quarantined by Bradley's extensive network, was forced to permanently abandon her luxury influencer aesthetic. Last I checked the court filings, she was working a minimum wage administrative job, her wages continually garnished to satisfy the remaining restitution. Simultaneously, my firm finalized the multi-million-dollar London contract. Bradley proved to be a ruthless but brilliant corporate partner. With the capital secured, I initiated an immediate and total rebranding. For years, our studio's logo had carried a subtle design nod to Richard's family crest, a foolish concession I had made in my 20s while still seeking a father's elusive approval. I systematically purged it from every server, every letterhead, and every physical asset. We became a completely new entity, erasing Richard's legacy from my life's work. A few extended relatives left voicemails calling me cruel. They accused me of destroying my own family over an asset, but they fundamentally misunderstood the transaction. I did not destroy them. I simply stopped subsidizing their exploitation. I finally realized that true liberation is rarely found in forced forgiveness. Sometimes, the ultimate act of self-preservation is the absolute and permanent severance of toxic bloodlines. Society conditions us to believe that family is an unbreakable bond, a mandatory emotional subscription we must endure no matter the cost. But keeping abusers close merely teaches them that your boundaries are negotiable. Letting go of my biological family was not a tragedy. It was the moment I finally found myself. The morning after the London contract was signed, I drove the Porsche along the lakefront before sunrise. The engine roared, a mechanical heartbeat perfectly tuned and entirely mine. The air was freezing, but the interior of the car was warm. I looked out over the dark water as the sky slowly turned a brilliant, bruised purple. For the first time in 32 years, my foundational architecture was uncompromised. I owed them nothing, and they had absolutely no access to me. If you found strength in Lauren's story, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of justice served.